Hey everybody, welcome back to the Badgerland Birding Podcast, bringing you birding news and stories from the Badger State and beyond. Today we're with Noah Steinberg, who is a Florida birding enthusiast. How's it going, Noah?
It's great. Thanks for having me. How about you?
Going well. We just got back from the Saxon Bog last night, so we're recovering on a little sleep, but it was a fun trip. What have you been up to lately?
Looking at goals mainly. Um, I just got back from Daytona Beach looking for a Vega goal that was found last night. Did not see that. Um, but I'm sort of recovering from the delirium of picking through 50,000 goals. And it's definitely, I need a little wind down from that.
Takes a toll on the human mind.
It sure does. It's not
That's
relaxing.
that's something the non-birder person just wouldn't understand, you know?
What's the equivalent of driving for 6 hours in Chicago traffic,
I don't
basically?
even think that because your mind's constantly going, you know?
You have to be aware 24/7 of what
It's
goal
kind of
you're.
like doing a Where's Waldo for like 6 hours.
I was thinking the same thing today.
Yeah.
I was sending this photo around of just like, massive white blobs and, find the rare goal in this.
There are some people that
It's
just do a scatter shot. They'll just take pictures of everything and then look through it
Mhm.
later, then be like, "Oh, there was actually a little goal in there, so I'm going to count that."
Right.
But
I
like you
mean,
didn't actually pick out that bird, so
No,
did
no,
you
I
really
don't
even
think you
see it?
should be able to count it, but there's some people that do count it or they tried to count it and report it.
I wonder if we'll
oh,
get to a point with AI where if you could like hold your phone and it would like search through the faces of the gulls and like pick out abnormalities or something. That'd be interesting.
Would you even want that technology or would that just be cheating?
No, I think that'd be great.
that
Oh,
sounds
okay.
dangerous.
Amar is gonna be out of a job if we can just find our own rare gulls.
I know. It's funny. I just got my book signed. I don't want to have to throw this away.
This is all AI business now. We don't need people like that Amar guy that used to be notable. That was you got signed, I'm assuming, when you met him down at Space Coast because
Yep.
you and your dad were actually doing the gull finding work.
Yeah. Yeah. We were doing a little scouting for the trip that we took with Amar.
Oh, that was scouting for the trip with Amar?
Well, I guess I don't know. It all blends together. We were at the landfill like 5 days that week. So the trip with Amar was the Space Coast trip. Um, but we had been there for like 3 previous days before that, just picking through goals and seeing what was around.
I've got to say that out of the landfills I've been to, which at this point has been more than three, that was a pretty nice landfill for birding. That had laid out pretty well.
Did you ever expect to be a point in life where you could say, of all the landfills I've been to?
Yes. I think as soon as I started birding, maybe like a month in or so, when I went to my first landfill, I think that it was that point when I mentally prepared to go to multiple landfills in my life,
Hmm.
specifically for birding. But that one down in Florida, is it the Cocoa
The
landfill?
Cocoa landfill, I think.
Was
Hmm.
really good. They had it laid out well. The landfill by us, you can't even get into. They just say no, you're not allowed to because it's DNR property or something.
Yeah, I mean, most of the landfills in Florida are the same way too. There are landfills that people used to have access to that don't anymore, and the Cocoa landfill in Brevard County is sort of a special one because one, you could get in, but you could also get so close to the gulls too because of how the retention ponds are laid out. And even now they're pushing the trash further, or I guess closer and closer to the road. So the gulls are all loafing. You could walk right up to them. It's sort of a equally magical and smelly experience.
Yeah, there's something about that kind of experience that I kind of appreciate because it's so out of left field. It's so strange to want to go to the landfill and be excited to go to the landfill to see some birds there. But let's talk a little bit about the findings that you had because I feel as though you and your dad had two of the best finds of the festival because you had the glaucous skull, right? Were you the
We
original
didn't,
finders of that one?
no, we weren't the original finders of
Okay.
that one. But we're certainly excited to see that one.
Yeah, but you were the original finder of the black-headed gull.
That's correct, yeah.
And that's a pretty great find. I mean, that's a needle in a
I think that was
haystack
probably
kind
the
of bird.
bird of the festival.
It was an exciting bird for sure. Um, and that was the first one that my dad and I had had in the state, and both of us have sort of viciously birded around this place. So it's kind of hard to get new ticks. And to find that one. It was the first one in Florida in I think three years, the first documented one at least in Florida in about 3 years. So far less than annual. Um, and it was sort of this how do I put that? It was it's such a gratifying moment at the landfill because we had been picking through so many goals for so long, days on end, um, and not really getting anywhere with it. It's kind of there isn't a lot of satisfaction to leaving the landfill one day with hopes of finding a rare goal and not, and having breathed in the fumes of whatever is going on there, and the gulls are flying around and pooping all over the place, and
Oh,
it's
Derek
it's
got
sort
pooped
of,
on.
Yeah,
oh yeah, I
yeah.
hear that's good luck.
I hope it was the black-headed gull, but there's really no way of knowing, you
Well,
know?
DNA, you bring that sample to a lab, and
It would have probably come back like ring-billed gull, and you would have just been disappointed by
You
it.
know,
It's probably better
Bonaparte's
to
skull would have
not
been
know.
fine too.
yeah,
There's
I,
a
I
lot of
wouldn't.
lot of good Bonaparte skulls down there.
You know what was interesting about that place too was a lot of the birds were really close that weren't gulls either, because there was a ton of wood storks there, and they were just
Mhm.
huddled in a group right by the road. And the vultures would fly really low overhead, so everything there was probably breathing in the fumes and a little delirious, and made it a great place to go birding.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely I don't know, there's kind of like a buzz or a high you get from being in that place. And I think part of it is the excitement, the adrenaline of it. But I feel like every time I go there, it takes like 15 minutes off my life.
It's possible, but it might be worth it if you keep finding rare stuff there. Because I think you had Iceland there too. I don't think I ever got to look at it, but I remember you two had Iceland gull.
We've had
But
Iceland. Yeah,
you were talking about how you're kind of managing your dad's big year. Can you tell us a little more about that process?
sure. I think even me saying the words "my dad's big year" out loud would definitely give him a little bit of a headache, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it anyway. So back in 2023, it sort of started, I guess, by accident. But my dad and I did a Florida State big year together. And throughout that process, we drove like 70,000 miles around the state. And um, through our efforts, he had set a new big year record at that point of 400 species. He was the first person to hit 400 species in the state in a year. Um, and in the next year, in 2024, that record was broken by two people. Amazingly, there were just so many more birds last year. A ton of crazy rarities showed up, and there was just more for people to get. And since the big year, because we sort of started that in like March or April of 2023, we had kind of planned on doing a couple of county big years, and um, just by traveling around, we ended up getting pretty close to the top of the state list at that point, which is when we decided, okay, maybe we should do a big year. This might be the time to do it. But since then, we've sort of wondered like what it would be like to do a big year at the start of the year, you know, because, and this is a lot of people's experiences too, at least in Florida, is very few people actually start the year with a big year. It always happens by accident. Everyone
Yeah, you
says,
get
no, I'm
negative
not doing the
stuff.
big year. I don't want to, I don't have the energy. I don't have the time to do that. That sounds like so much work. And then spring migration rolls around and suddenly everybody's a big year enthusiast.
Really?
Um, but what happens or what happened to us in 2023 is we spent basically the latter half of the year chasing everything we had missed in the beginning of the year. So it was sort of a sprint to the finish line. Um, and we wondered what the process would be like, what the competition would be like if a big year was started with the intention of being a big year at the start of the year. So getting all the hard winter rarities, front loading it. So basically, the last like 3 or 4 months of the year can be spent only for chasing rarities as you need to and going out and actually finding birds. Um, I think one of my complaints about doing a big year is that it was all chasing. Like it was there wasn't a lot of actual birding.
Sure, just going after the reports that come through.
Yeah.
Um, is it tough in Florida too, just because of the weird shape of the state? Because you have the Panhandle, and then it does go into Key West, so you could have to go get stuff on the Keys, or you could have to go all the way to the Panhandle on any given day. How do you deal with that?
I Coffee is very helpful.
Have you had to at
Um,
any point go all the way from one end to the other when something's been reported?
I haven't. I know my dad at one point during the 2023 big year, he was up in Big Bend looking for some species, and a black-throated gray warbler was photographed in Miami. So we drove from Big Bend to
Ooh,
Miami, which is, I think, I don't know, probably 7 hours,
Wow.
I'm
and
surprised it's
went
not
and
longer than that.
yeah, so like tip to tip, like Pensacola to Key West, I think is like 15 hours of driving.
Wow.
Might be a little more. It's long. And we're located in Orlando, which is kind of the perfect place for launching this sort of effort because it's basically equidistant from both of those 2 points and by proxy everywhere in the state. Um, but the chore of driving to Pensacola for a bird, it can be kind of crushing when you only have one day to go, um, and you have to drive back and forth. We did that this year. There was a sage thrasher and a broad-tailed hummingbird that I think are both still being seen out in Walton County, in Okaloosa County, in the Panhandle, like almost to Pensacola. And the day we decided to go was the day that that historic snowstorm was rolling into Florida.
Mm.
Oh,
And my dad was very adamantly against being around other Florida drivers in a snowstorm because
that's
the
probably a good
chaos of
move.
Florida driving as it is I lived in New York City before moving here, and I thought that driving around Brooklyn in traffic and dodging cars, I thought that was going to prepare me well for living in this state. And it was no match. Florida drivers are their own breed of crazy. I don't know how people get around here. I
They
don't know
were
how we get around
surprisingly
here.
bad, I can
Derek,
say.
what do you think? Because you've driven in New Jersey, New York, and Florida. Which one is, and Chicago, which one's the worst?
I think New York was the worst because flew into LaGuardia and it was just immediately people honking and being annoyed. But the thing that's annoying about Florida is like all the tolls and random stuff too. Like as someone who's
Mhm.
not from there trying to navigate it, just be like, okay, where are we supposed to go now? Can we pay for this one? And then like one of them was like, oh, it's cash only. It's like, how would anyone know that? There's just these random things that like you're just kind of put into these situations. And I thought that was tough. And then yeah, the drivers were just kind of like all over the place.
They lay on that horn quick. I think sometimes the light wouldn't even turn yet, and someone was laying on the horn just in anticipation that the light could turn.
Dude, and
Oh,
what we had this weird thing where we got stuck at a red light that just never turned green.
Oh yeah.
And so we were there for
mhm.
like 20 minutes and
I like
someone
how
got
he's
out
just
of a
shaking his head
car.
like, yeah, that's
Someone
common
got out of a
stuff.
car and went to the
Yeah,
person in the front, and I'm assuming they were like, "Hey, this isn't gonna ever turn green. Like you're gonna have to go at some point." It was just really weird.
that's part of life here. Um, so Florida drivers in the snow, not a good thing. So we had to get out of there quickly. And so we went to the broad-tailed hummingbird first, and then the sage thrasher. One was in a yard, one was at a boardwalk in a state park. And it was a 7 hour drive each way. And we basically had an hour of playtime built into the plan so that we could get out of there before the snowstorm hit and the ice storm hit. And we got stuck in the panhandle for 5 days. Um, so there wasn't a lot of room for
That's
error
wait,
in
wait,
this
wait.
plan.
You would be stuck in the panhandle for
Yeah, we
five
would
days
have
if that's what happened?
if
Okay.
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah. If the plan wasn't executed to a T, we were gonna get stuck in the panhandle because I-10 was closed for like 4 days, I believe, because of snow in Florida. It's a weird world we live in. Uh, so we have, a bunch of stories like this where it's like, okay, we have this window to get the bird, and we drive and we go, and the hummingbird came out right away, and then we drove over the sage thrasher and pished once, and it popped out, and we got our photos, and we got out of there, and the cars from Alabama are driving by with ice hanging off of them, and we're drinking our victory coffee, looking at our photos, and um, but there are also plenty of stories. For anyone who's done a big year, us included, where you drive or travel to great lengths to get the bird and you don't get the bird. And that drive home is the longest one.
Oh yeah, we went on a chase of a tundra bean goose once that was, I think, 7 hours one way, and we missed it the first day, and that is
Hmm.
a terrible, terrible feeling. We were driving back from the bog yesterday, and that was driving back then was a terrible feeling, and we saw everything we wanted to see for the most part. So that
Mm.
long drive can just be agonizing if you didn't see what you wanted to see for sure.
The weather, so when we were driving back from the bog, we got caught in like a little bit of snow. So it was like you get that effect of it looks like you're going warp speed, because it's just coming at the windshield.
Hmm.
And then we got caught in like some freezing rain. So it started to like ice up the front of the windshield. And of course, the wipers wiping everything except the part where you need to see. And then it's like freezing as it's hitting the window. There's like trucks in the ditches. You're just like, man,
Oh
I did
yeah.
not account for this. And, it you need a lot more focus then on the drive back. Then you're like, it's gonna be a casual drive back to Wisconsin. And I was like, nah, it's not.
But to your point, Noah, it feels a lot better and a lot more relaxed when you're like, oh, I can look at my photos and see that I got northern hawk owl and boreal owl today, or in your case, sage thrasher. So it definitely
But
it changes the context for what the events were that you experienced. It goes from that was the worst day ever to that was a fantastic day.
well, and even more so than that, I think this is just the way that I and my dad are wired, where it's not we didn't get the bird, it's we have to drive back to this place to get the bird again.
Right.
And when that bird is in Pensacola and we're in Orlando, that it's crushing. It really is. It's the parts of a big year um, that um, prevent you from doing another big year.
I'm picturing you guys getting stuck there and be like, hey, that's fine. We have 5 days now to get these birds. This is actually best case scenario.
Yeah, we were with our friend John Grosskopf, who's one of the state bird reviewers and on the Florida Ornithological Society Records Committee. He's a very close friend of ours, and he was saying like, yeah, like let's get stuck and we'll play in the snow, and and that was kind of the joke back and forth the entire drive of like, come on, let's just stop and play in the snow. And it's like, no, we're gonna get stuck here. It's like, yeah, but then we could play, and then who knows what we'll find? We could find crossbills, and we can, the how long car drives go, and the delirium builds up, and then uh, your birding wish list kind of goes with that too. And so instead of going, yeah, I just got like two very difficult state birds today, that was great. It goes to, oh, but where's the unicorn?
Yeah, exactly.
Think you
There
guys
can
need a
always be
coffee
more.
sponsor.
Coffee sponsor, that's a good idea.
Here's an interesting question for you because Florida is probably second to California, or maybe first over California, the state with the most exotic species in it. So, red-whiskered bulbul, various parrot species. How do you manage those in Florida? Or, like, do you go for all of the ones that are provisional still? Like, we saw yellow chevron parakeets. Do you want those on your list because they could at some point then turn into a bigger list? What are you doing about those, or what are you supposed to do about those?
So most of anybody who's doing a big year in Florida, my dad included, we're going by the bird checklist,
Hmm.
the Clemens checklist. We're going counting the things that are listed as provisional. Um, and I wish we didn't have to do that. I wish nobody had to do that because driving around Miami in traffic and trying to find parrots, and you're just staring into sun and looking at concrete, waiting for a flyover of a macaw. Um, It's really not a satisfying experience unless you're
Oh,
into that sort of thing. But I don't know anyone who is. Um, so it's funny. Up until a few weeks ago, my dad was sort of adamantly, no, I'm not doing a big year. And one of the biggest points to support not doing the big year was the exotics because it's such a chore to get to them.
hmm.
And there's so many of them in Florida. And it's one of those ones that you just kind of have to suffer through. Um, and there's a lot of that on a big year. We've already touched on that, with the driving um, but you just kind of have to do it.
I
If you
will.
if you want to if you want the number, if you want to break the record, you have to get those birds.
I will say I thought it was going to be different. Like I thought you'd be like in this tropical paradise. There's just these flocks of parrots hanging out in the trees. You're like, oh, there's that one. There's that one. I didn't know it would be as much like, oh man, driving in Miami is terrible. And then it was just like a flyover that like I have no idea where they went. Like I thought it'd be so much different. We thought we'd be able to just sit and watch flocks of Nande parakeets. We had one like fly in. They sat there for like 5 seconds and then left. It was like, geez, this is more difficult than I thought it would be.
I was surprised how the monk parakeets were just everywhere. That was what we
Hmm.
saw most, and that's the species we can get near Chicago, and we've seen them other places too. So we would hear parrot chatter, and we'd be like, "Oh, sweet, let's go track those down." That'd be monk parakeets, the one species we didn't really want to see. Well, I mean, not want to see, but the species we
Yeah,
didn't need to see.
and at least when you're somewhere that doesn't really have a lot of established exotic species, it's easy to narrow something down when you hear it calling.
Yep.
Um, and I have an audio background. I do a lot of audio analysis of bird recordings and field recording and that sort of work. I'm sort of obsessed with it and love it. And I don't understand parrot vocalizations. They all sound the same to me. And I don't really know anybody who would disagree with that. And so when you're somewhere like Miami, where you're going after like 12 different parrot species, and in the distance you hear something, um, it's it can be kind of defeating
What do you
because
think the
it's you're so
hardest?
close.
What do you think the hardest one to get is?
Oh, the white-winged parakeet for sure.
The Ocean
Oh
Reef
yeah.
Club?
Yeah, that's the nobody can get that one. That's you know sort of off limits. There's just that one
You guys are gonna get
population
it, right?
left. No, I don't think we're gonna get that one.
So
Derek, didn't
I know
Zeke get it?
Ezekiel got it in for his
Ezekiel,
big year. I
yeah,
don't know how, but
he
he got in there.
those were special circumstances. They, he's Ezekiel is the nicest kid on the planet. And he last year he did some amazing work. And uh, exceptions were made to allow him to see that. And I, it's just not going to be the case for other people.
I thought you were gonna say he snuck in. Like he pretended he was a shipment of mangoes or something from the store and then just
Oh,
snuck in on a truck.
Dude, think of how crazy that would be, like infiltrating the Ocean Reef Club to find white-winged parakeets.
yeah, but I couldn't talk about it on your podcast then. Like, hey, let me come on this podcast and admit to my crimes.
Well, you
That's
could hypothetically, like, here's how I would do it. If I were to sneak in there and count a species that I
yeah.
may or may not have checked
No,
on
I
them.
mean, if I were going to do it, I don't think the fruit card idea is a very good one.
Ouch.
But um, no offense.
Offense
But
taken.
maybe mail. I don't know. I haven't really thought through this. Yeah. Maybe there's no good. Maybe we shouldn't break into that place. I don't know.
What do you think is the second most challenging one to get down there? Is there
Second
another one?
most challenging exotic.
Yeah, is there another one that's pretty rare?
Um, I mean, white-eyed parakeets can be tough. Um, there's like a couple like kind of reliable locations for that. But mainly I've only seen them as flyovers.
Okay.
Um, those tend to be kind of tough. Um, I find the macaws to be pretty difficult. I think they're becoming more reliable than they used to be.
What kind do you
Um,
guys have down there?
We have blue and yellow, and I guess chestnut fronted would be
Okay.
the other one.
We
We
saw a
saw
pair of
blue and
blue and
yellow.
yellow at Brewer Park.
Mhm.
I don't know, like, is that somebody's pet that they released, or they presumed
Those are
wild?
presumed wild, breeding in the wild.
That's crazy.
Um, yeah, there's in that area. There's also Coral Reef Park, which is maybe like a couple miles to the north of there.
Sounds so
Um,
exotic.
yeah, right. Coral Reef Park, and I think for a number of years now, there's been like a small population of macaws that breeds in the neighborhood near there.
So those blue and yellows are countable. We can count the blue
They're
and yellows.
yeah, not in the ABA checklist, but um, we count them down here.
Man, it felt so weird because we saw them reported there and we went there and they were just sitting there in a tree picking at some sort of large pods on those trees and it was just like, oh, there's some macaws.
Yeah, casual,
Yeah,
casual
very
macaws.
casual. Casual macaws indeed. We also, one of the interesting naturalized exotics we got was the spot-breasted oriole. That was kind of
Hmm.
neat.
Those are cool. I find those to be difficult too. I don't think anybody else really has that problem. Um,
Nope,
but
one of our other friends has that problem because he said
okay,
there's nowhere reliable to get them.
because I don't know, everyone has like their nemesis bird, right?
Yep.
Like everybody has that common bird that, all their friends know how to get and they go for it and they miss it every time. And during my 2023 big year, that was the bird for me. Every time I would
Really?
go for a spot-breasted oriole, I couldn't find one until like the waning, like, parts of December when I finally had one calling and was able to track one down.
Huh.
But every reliable location that somebody took me to, we couldn't find them. They're like, oh, they were here yesterday. They were here this morning. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's funny because we did a lot of research on eBird and you never really know what you're going to get when you go with eBird sightings. This stuff could always be flyovers or it could just be bad data. But we found a place that had a number of them reported daily. We went there and got them pretty easily because they were feeding on some fruit there. But then we had the
Mhm.
exact opposite experience with white crown pigeon. We tried at least three different white crown pigeon spots that looked like they were reliable there and just no trace of them at all.
You were looking around Miami for those?
Yeah, we didn't really have time to go any further south. I mean,
There was like a white crown pigeon neighborhood point, so we drove around there for a while. There had been a couple sightings there. What was that park we went to? What
I
was it
don't
called?
remember what the park was called. We heard that they were
Couple
much
parks with
easier
like
closer to
baseball
the Keys,
diamonds.
though,
Yeah.
but we just
Mm.
didn't have time to go that far south that day.
Yeah. Yeah, if in the Keys, that's a kind of a junk bird.
That sounds
And
great.
Don't tell us that.
I'm
No, tell
sorry.
us that. We get to go to the Keys and then to find them.
Yeah, go to the Keys. No, it's really I think those are kind of the funniest birds because you'll be going and just walking through these like, thick like, mangrove um, you know, uh, and it's dense and you can't see anything. And then all of a sudden, right next to you, there's just like this like barreling, like crashing, through, and all these pigeons fly. They're so clumsy.
Oh, are they pretty shy too? Do you not see them out in the open that much?
I've seen them out in the open. There's a cemetery in Key West.
Sounds about right.
And in the cemetery, I have seen them, maybe a dozen of them or so, just perched out in one of the trees. Um, I think other than that, mainly they tend to be pretty shy in my experience.
Okay. That's what I was reading about them is that they're pretty timid, unlike a lot of other dove species. But I was
No,
hoping we'd find them just sitting out on a wire or something because some other people said that was their experience. But going back to the original point, it is funny how some birds it's just like, oh, that was easy, even if it's not supposed to be, and some birds are just so challenging.
yeah. Yep. That's the blessing and the curse of birding.
Is what makes it fun is because if you found everything the first try, you wouldn't have that extra struggle to overcome. There's something even more gratifying about not seeing it first and then seeing it the second time, or the third time that you try. So as much as it's annoying to not be able to get stuff, it's the reason you keep coming back to a large extent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was also my experience with the gray gold too.
The gray gull.
One.
Yeah,
Derek saw the gray gull.
I did.
it's a cool bird, right?
Very cool. Yeah.
How many times do you go for it?
So I was in the area like specifically to see it, and it happened to not be reported at that time. So I ended up seeing a masked booby instead, which was pretty cool. So I guess then I specifically flew to look for it at a different time.
Hmm.
And then it was like I walked on the beach and it was right there.
Yeah. Um, the day that showed up, I was at work already, so I couldn't. I mean, I could have probably, I'm sick, I have to leave, but then having to drive all the way out there would have been kind of impossible. And so I had to go for that like five other times.
Oh,
Ooh.
geez.
Yeah, it
It
was
seemed really hit or miss. Like it was the easiest thing you've ever seen, or it was just nowhere to be found.
yeah. There was one day I walked up and down that beach like 12 miles looking for that bird. Spent the
It's a
entire
nice
day.
beach though.
It's a nice beach. I had popcorn too. There was a flock of laughing gulls following me. Everybody thought I was crazy, which maybe they were right. Um, but to your point, when I actually saw that bird, that it was just the most relieving experience,
Did a
especially when you could
celebration
just,
dance, and everyone thought you were even weirder.
I don't know if I danced. Um, I'm not much of a dancer, but uh, it was definitely the most relieving experience of my life.
Of your
And not
life.
even so
Wow.
like not so because I got the bird, but because I didn't have to drive there again.
Yeah, there are definitely some places where you just don't want to have to go there again for whatever reason, because it's distant, because the place just sucks. There's places
Hmm.
that we've been like, well, thank goodness we don't have to go back there.
Yeah. And so, it's funny when people say birding's so relaxing. Oh, I have coworkers, I
Those are the like
family
80-year-old
members.
people.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you get to look at birds. Like, oh, Noah looks at birds all the time. That's cool. He
Have
must be so chill and relaxed. And meanwhile, I'd like, you should see the command center we have in our car when we're traveling because we have to have, we have to immediately post every photo. We have to post the photos, the documentation immediately because we have to be done with that bird when we get to the next bird. That's sort of like the family, like the Steinberg, like philosophy. Um, at least in terms of listing is, as soon as you see the bird, you're on to the next bird
You should make
immediately.
a rule of listing guide or something, just like the 10 rules to listing that you need to abide and live by.
Yep. Rule number one, always provide documentation.
Always provide documentation. Never
Yes.
be that person that provides documentation of everything until they find a rare bird on their own and then suddenly don't have photos of it.
Yeah. And I mean, there are certainly birds that are difficult to get documentation for, like, seabirds, for example, we'll see watching. And eBird
Ivory-billed
has articles
woodpecker.
about this. Ivory-billed woodpecker. I saw one in my backyard the other day.
The pictures are
Oh
always
yeah.
blurry for some reason.
I know.
And I don't know
You
why,
know.
but if you see one and take a picture of it, it always comes out with a picture of a pileated.
Mm. It reminds me of like those weird like History Channel shows I would watch as a kid, like Ancient Aliens or like any of those like Finding Bigfoot ones. And it's like, everybody's like, like some like random guy calls himself a doctor and he's convinced like, yeah, like this is the proof. And you look at it and it's just like a blurry photo of a cinder block. And
Oh yeah.
Somebody actually reported an ivory-billed woodpecker when we were in Florida, and it was like
Mhm.
pictures of a pileated, but it was kind of funny to see it
They were
pop up.
pretty good pictures too.
Yeah.
Showed all
Well,
the documents,
in their
showed
defense,
all
there
field
was
markings.
there was a time when if you searched ivory-billed woodpecker, like a pileated woodpecker picture showed up, and it said ivory-billed woodpecker next to it.
It's
Mm.
on
I
Google.
think they fixed it, but I mean,
One would hope.
that's pretty bad. That's pretty egregious.
I think when we were at the Cocoa landfill together, somebody reported a flock of scarlet ibis flying over.
Really? I
Oh
don't remember
Hmm.
that. It could be though. I love that we have
And
the core memory of being at the Cocoa landfill together though.
I know how many people can you say, yeah, I met this guy at the landfill.
Probably more than you'd think. Probably more than
That's
I'd like to
true.
admit.
Yeah, no, me too,
It
actually.
is worth noting though that when Derek and I showed up at the landfill, you and your dad were there and you were the reason we got on the bird too. Because otherwise, if you weren't there, it would have been pretty overwhelming to try to find it. But you had it pretty narrowed down. You guys were like, yeah, it likes this puddle over there. And then you just put your scope over there and you're like, yeah, there it is. And then they all flew away and then came back and you're like, oh, I'll find it again. There it is.
Yeah, that bird had such a routine. I was really fascinated by that. Um, it was that's only the second black-headed gull I've ever seen. And the first one was in Central Park a few years ago, and it was really
Hmm.
distant. And so that was sort of my first experience actually paying attention to its, behavior, personality, whatever you want to call it. Um, and I was amazed that that was the only goal in the landfill that had that specific of a routine. When all the laughing gulls would flush, any Franklin gull we've had flush there in the past, or Iceland gulls, or anything common, they all move around, they scatter, they don't really have a specific routine. And that black-headed gull at its spots, and every time it would flush, it would go back to that spot. And it was amazing, and it made it really easy to track down.
Is it still there?
It was reported, I don't know, 2 or 3 days ago, as of, the time we're taping now. I had looked for it with a buddy of mine sometime earlier this week or last week, and we couldn't find it, so I had assumed it was gone, but then it was photographed a couple days later.
Interesting. And how's the big year going this year? Are you guys on a good pace? You feel like you can break the record?
Well, that's the intention. So I um, we learned a lot of lessons from 2023. And one of the lessons I learned is that can't really break the record if you're working a full-time job.
Hmm.
Um, at least,
Everyday
I
job is
work an
terrible.
in-person job. Yeah. I wish I could just bird all the time, like my dad is able to. But, you know, the luxury I do have is a lot of downtime when I'm at work and a laptop. And so the role that I took on in the latter parts of 2023 was as the big year manager, where it became clear he can beat the record, but he needs help to do so, managing the data, managing the photos, coming up with the plans. Um, I sort of obsessively read through eBirt reports and comb through the data and look at historical sightings and have everybody's list memorized and um, all of that comes to be really useful. My dad, he used to be an endurance athlete. He was a cyclist, and uh, he had a coach that managed all of his data. He would train, he would send the data, his coach would tell him what to do, and he would show up at the race and he would win the race. He was a really good athlete. And that's sort of the mindset I'm taking with this too is, I know I can't beat the record with my schedule. But what I can do is what I'm already doing, which is just obsessing over data, obsessing over reports, and coming up with plans, having spreadsheets. I have all of our projections mapped out. I have all of the species I think we're going to see or he's going to see, and then keeping track of that, comparing it to the guy who beat the big year record last year, Tom Bisco, comparing our 2023 list to his list from 2024, and then comparing that to my projections from this year. There's a lot of moving parts in this, but the big year is complicated.
I just realized too, it's only February.
Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah,
that too. I'm like, what are we, like July?
I was like,
yeah.
we're about halfway through. You probably know by now. And then I realized that we are only about a month of the way through.
I
Be
mean,
kind of be
so
kind of funny if you just became like a professional big year manager. Like if anyone was doing a big year, like you knew you were making it, like, yeah, Noah contacted me to manage my year and like that kind of thing.
you joke about that. That's my dream.
That'd be so cool.
I think about that all the time. Like, how cool would it be? Just, I have the spreadsheets, I have my templates. I love doing this. I'll manage somebody's big
You're
year for
managing
sure.
like 8 different state big years and 12 different county big years all at the same time.
Yeah. I'm always meddling in people's big years as it is, so might as well,
You should
To
really go get this
sabotage or
bird.
to help?
I don't sabotage. No, I believe in people's efforts, but I like to know what they're doing too.
I sent this guy
Um,
12 hours in the wrong direction to try for a
yeah.
Phantom Ross's goal.
Yeah, no, that, it would be a funny that would be a funny prank, but no, I wouldn't do that to somebody. Um, but okay, so the metrics that I do have available right now is so far it's February. Um, and so far this year, my dad has seen 10 species that the guy who beat the big year record last year didn't see in the entire year.
Okay, that's a good start. I'm
Um,
assuming one's black-headed gull.
one is black-headed gull,
Glaucous gull?
glaucous gull. There wasn't a glaucous gull in 2024. Sage thrasher, broad-tailed hummingbird.
Very nice.
Um, red phalarope is a good one from a pelagic.
Yep.
Um, man, it's been a bonkers winter. It's hard keeping track of all the birds that we've seen.
A lot of weird weather patterns, so I imagine that that definitely contributed to some of the strange stuff that's
How
ended up in
many
the state.
pelagics do you have to do to make sure that you get enough species?
All of them.
How many are there?
Um, as many as you can organize. I think one of the biggest areas improvement in Florida birding needs to be the accessibility of pelagics. And that's because pelagics, except for like maybe like a handful of like Autobahn or like festival trips, they're all organized privately, you know, fishing charters that are taking out. Um, and so a lot of it is having to know the right people, which is great if you know the right people. And I and my dad have been super fortunate to be able to do a lot of pelagics in Florida. Um, but for me, like seabirds are like the most magical thing in the world. I think
Derek
they're
loves
so cool.
seabirds.
I if I desert island like birding. If I can only do one type of birding for the rest of my life, pelagics all the way, seabirds
Wow.
100%. Um, not even a question.
You get
Um,
seasick?
I've gotten seasick once.
It didn't
It
stop
was
him, I can tell.
up in Hatteras
Oh,
after a big storm. I think maybe there was a hurricane or something, and we went out a couple of days later, and that was pretty rough.
was
Um,
it just extra choppy? Like that's what got to you?
yeah, choppy, big swells. But
Big birds?
yeah, big bird. I mean, we had a white-tailed tropic bird that day. It was cool. I'll just
That's
remember
cool.
I was heaved over the side of the boat, and in between, bits of emptying my stomach, I looked up and I went Audubon Shearwater, and then I went back to my
You're
business.
like,
And
wow, look at that. I picture
look at
you
that
just talking to
thing.
like the other people, like, you think this is relaxing, Margaret? You think this is fun?
I was just when you said people think that birding is relaxing for you, just a montage of different metal moments of you birding, just out in a thunderstorm, like white knuckling through snow.
Oh, dude, storm birding, hurricane birding in Florida. It's oh my God. I mean, it's dangerous. It's a stupid thing to do, but it's so much fun.
You're like, it's a stupid thing to do, but I do it all the time.
Every hurricane, we'll go out because, you know, we get, seabirds on our lakes in Central Florida. Like during Milton, this is definitely like our best hurricane. My dad and I found two black cat petrel on a lake in near
Oh,
Orlando. And then another birder we're friends with and us, we found a black swift and got
Hmm.
photographs, which is pending review in the records committee. But if that's accepted, that would be a first state record.
that's pretty cool.
So we call them our Super Bowl. It's so exciting.
Yeah,
Um,
I could see that that would be pretty epic
I
to
do
get that stuff
remember. So
pictured.
I lived in Louisiana for a couple years getting my master's degree, and there was like a hurricane that hit where I lived, but the birders who were like further north, like I was evacuating because like my apartment was gonna get hit, and they're like, "Oh, we got a rare seabird, magnificent frigate bird just flew over." I'm like, "Good for you guys!" Like, glad you're
There
having
was one
fun.
specific one that they were
Sooty
reporting. I
turn.
remember. Sooty turn, yeah.
mhm.
Yep. And I'm like, good for you guys. Glad you're having fun.
So Noah, Florida obviously has a lot of crazy birds to come see. We like to do some top five lists of what the top five birds are to see in each state. What would you say the
Mhm.
top five are to see in Florida for somebody that doesn't live there and they want to go get the top five best birds? Because I have some interesting thoughts on it because you have to quantify whether stuff that's naturalized, but you can only find there is valuable, like the spot-breasted oriole.
Hmm. So are we talking about like birds that are common or regular?
I would
Um,
kind of have it as birds you can only see in Florida slash it's way easier in Florida to get them than anywhere else. So like one that I think for sure would be on that list would be Florida scrub jay
yeah,
because
Florida
being
scrub jay.
endemic, you can only
Um,
get it in Florida.
whooping crane is the number one for me.
Really?
Not that you can't
Interesting.
get it in other places, but those places are really far away. Um, and so, like, if you're on the East Coast, like Florida, we have one in Osceola County, pretty close to where I live, where you could just walk up to the thing, basically. It's just in a neighborhood. Um, uh, other states have whooping cranes,
We've got a decent amount
but
of whooping cranes in Wisconsin.
we have a handful left in Florida, and they're all old.
Yeah.
Like I think the one I mentioned is like it's probably I think 24 or 25 years old.
Oh
It's at
well.
the end of its
Can
life.
rent a car.
Yeah, I could rent a car. Um,
Finally leave Florida
so
for once.
Yeah.
it's for me like it's kind of a bittersweet thing because it's sort of like the whooping cranes are these like magnificent birds, but also in Florida it represents the end of something too, because those cranes are going to die in a few years and there are going to be none left here.
I believe that was part of the population they tried to reintroduce and then eventually gave up because the mortality rates were too high.
Yeah. There, so many problems with them mating with sandhill cranes. The
They
one, the
love
one
to do that.
actually, the one I mentioned, it was just photographed a few weeks ago, mating with the sandhill crane.
Not helping the species at all.
No. Um, so other than that, I mean, the Florida scrub jay, sure. Snail kites,
Yep, that's a
that's,
good one.
it's a classic one. They're pretty easy here. People love to come here and get their snail kites. Um, I would say, I don't know if I could lump both Anis together in one or I should do them
Hmm.
separately. But smooth bill, groove billed Anis, I- we get them both regularly in South Florida in small numbers, of course. But that is super cool. Um, and I guess that leaves room for one more bird.
I was thinking maybe like white crown pigeon, to be honest.
White crowned pigeon. Yeah, I guess
Limpkin,
so.
white crown
You know
pigeon,
what?
limpkin,
Mm-mm.
spot-breasted oriole.
Antillean nighthawk.
Oh yeah,
Hmm.
I've heard that before. I've heard people say that.
Those birds are freaking cool, man. Nighthawks are
How
so
common is
cool.
that?
I think they're
Um,
down near the Keys, aren't they?
yeah, so over the summer, you can find them in the lower keys. Um, there's a couple reliable locations like a Marathon Key near the airport and near the Key West airport. I've also seen them over downtown Key West too. It's kind of like you just look up and as long as you could tell the difference in where the spot is on the wing and the flight style and the vocalizations between that and a common nighthawk,
Hmm.
you should be able to pick them out. Um, and I just think nighthawk behavior is the most fascinating thing. The flight displays and the booming that they do, they're fascinating creatures. And and the Keys are the only place in the US where Antillean nighthawk are regular.
I think Will
Interesting.
was telling us that too. That was a
Hmm.
species he mentioned.
So is there
But there's so many
anything
birds.
you guys tried for your big year that you missed so far?
Um, yeah, for sure. Um, well, I mean, this Vega goal,
Oh.
from today, which I didn't really expect to get. Um, we on a pelagic we went on, we were hoping for Manx shearwater, and haven't seen that yet. There was a pelagic we were invited on, but weren't available to go on that got razorbill and Manx shearwater. I definitely consider that as a flub or a miss on our part. Um, other than that, I think it's been a pretty successful year so far. Um, the strategy that is working really well. is going for all the hard birds first.
Mm.
That's the play for sure.
Yeah. Um, and the blessing and the curse of this is there's so many hard birds right now. Um, but it, it's been pretty successful so far. My dad has gotten pretty much every hard bird he's gone for. Um, I can't really think of an example of one that I don't think we're going to get at any point.
That's good. And how did you get started into birding?
Um, that is a great question. So during the pandemic, my background's in audio engineering and music, and I was living up in New York, working at a popular music studio. And the pandemic hit the music industry really hard.
Did you work with anyone we would know? John Mayer?
Um, I worked on an Aerosmith album. That
That's
was
pretty
cool.
cool.
I worked for a mix engineer who had worked on like some John Mayer records, like Continuum he worked
Oh,
on.
There you
dang.
go,
I
John
didn't
Mayer.
work on that. I didn't work on any John Mayer stuff, but um,
But by
you know,
association, you
by
did.
association, there's some relation, I guess. Um, but for the most part, there wasn't a lot going on musically during the pandemic. And I graduated college in 2020. And that was the world I entered into. And um, I had sort of worked diligently and really hard to set up this career where I graduate from college and I work in this famous music studio. And, I'd have my path sort of set out for me. And like a lot of people, the pandemic shattered that. That opportunity wasn't really available anymore. Um, and I had to pivot without a plan. I had no choice. And so the day after leaving the job at that studio I had, I went on a camping trip with my dad to Acadia National Park, which was, from New York is not terribly far, about an 8-hour drive. And one day it was raining. We were kind of bored. We didn't know what to do. And he said, "Hey, you want to go birding?" My dad's been birding since the 90s. And I guess by some association I have throughout my life, but never seriously. Um, but we went to some like, random park next to a gas station near Bar Harbor, Maine, and I remember seeing red-eyed vireo and cedar waxwings and just thinking it was the coolest thing in the world. Um, and I got back from that trip and I just did not stop birding.
That's how it gets you.
And then my first chase bird was a brown booby up in Vermont.
Hmm.
Bizarre. It was just there was this brown booby that was on like this tiny little fishing pond in the middle of nowhere in Vermont. And we drove, my dad was living in the Adirondacks at the time in upstate New York, and we drove over together and we saw this booby, and it was my first chase bird, and it was so exciting. And what a bizarre looking thing that is, especially having never seen a seabird before. Um, and the sort of adrenaline, the addiction of chase never really left me at that point. And mm, I've just been running around incessantly ever since, just trying to see as many birds as possible.
Yeah. That's that's definitely how it gets you.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Have you in your time out in the field ever seen anything paranormal or sketchy or Sasquatchy or swamp ape-ish?
We always
Swamp
ask everyone
ape-ish.
if they've had any weird experiences out birding, either like
Mm.
with people or with stuff they can't explain. We actually we talked to our kayak guide that was touring us around down at Space Coast, and he
By
said he had
Haulover
some
Canal.
experience that he did not feel he wanted to share with us with ghosts when he was out in the swamp at night. So,
Oh. I don't know if I have that. The swamp ape thing is interesting. Um,
oh,
I haven't
yeah,
seen
swamp babe
one.
story.
No, yeah, so my first birding trip to Florida, which was maybe a couple months after I started birding, um, my dad's stepmom and I, we went down and we were birding around Big Cypress and the Everglades, um, and there was the campground we were staying in. we thought it was just going to be some random campground. But it turned out it's owned by this guy named Dave Shealy, who calls himself like the preeminent like researcher of swamp apes,
Hmm.
of skunk apes. And the campground is called the Skunk Ape headquarters, and there's this little museum, and the blurry like Bigfoot photos that he says he's taken, and like a mold of a foot that he says, and he says that he's seen Skunk Ape multiple times before, and he'll just go wander into the swamp on these giant like sort of makeshift, they call them like swamp buggies, but they're like these like giant tractors with like that are basically made from like boat parts and like recycled like farm equipment, and it's the sketchiest thing. And these guys will just ride into the swamp for like days on end and um, go look for skunk ape.
Picture
Yeah.
him just being like, "Well, gotta go," and just running right into the swamp, and then you see him like a week later.
Yeah, and it's I just think like, oh, like I wonder what birds he saw out there.
Just
Um
yeah.
but I mean, besides like that loose association to this eccentric
It's the
character and
same
the in this
association as you have with John Mayer as you do with the
yeah,
swamp
right.
ape.
Like I knew a guy who knew a guy who saw the skunk ape, so that
Somewhere
was
there's
Okay,
one
pretty
of
work
those
cool.
worked on
things
John
on a
Mayer's
wall
album.
that has the like crazy person strings going from one to the next of like
Yeah,
Swamp
Like
right.
Ape,
it
and then
connects
it's
like Swamp Ape
John
is
Mayer.
John Mayer. They're the
Yeah,
same
exactly.
person or something.
Mm, now you're onto something. How many people do you
Gravity.
think we could connect in this podcast?
Probably several.
Um, but no, I can't think of anything like paranormal or uh sketchy. How do you define sketchy?
There was a couple stories people have told us where they ran into people that seemed like they had ill intentions when they were out in the woods. Like I think
Mm,
if I remember correctly, somebody we talked to had their car broken into. People gave them some weird looks and then just weird stuff like that.
mm. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I've heard stories like that too. But luckily haven't experienced anything like that. Yeah, I mean, have almost had the police called on me before.
We think we
But
had
I
that happen to us down in Florida almost, so.
yeah,
Was
I
it was
wasn't
it at the
doing
Grey Gull spot?
was it at the Great Goal spot? No,
This
I
guy's got
wish.
popcorn again.
I, w- I was this is during my big year. I was looking for Brewer's Blackbird along this road, these farm roads and somewhere in Central Florida. And they were in this person's like horse pen. And I was scoping them out or from the side of the road and taking photos. And they came out and they're like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, there's this rare bird in your yard. And they go, there's birds lots of places. You can't do that here. I was like, oh no, but like this bird's really special. Like there aren't a lot of them. And then they were like, oh, like our neighbors have had problems with like people breaking in. Like you have to go. And I was like, oh, but I'm on the side of the road. And then they're gonna call the cops. And
I mean, I don't think they
um,
could really do anything. I think you're fully within your rights to be on the road.
so the thing that you might not understand is that might be true, but it's also Florida.
Right.
So they might, there are people, there might be rules, and they might not be allowed to do the thing. Um, but it doesn't mean it might not happen either. And
So did you
True.
get the Blackbird?
yeah, I got the Blackbird, but
So of course I got the Blackbird.
The cops had at least a 15-minute response window, so I had that much time to find it.
yeah, right. Um, yeah, but I don't know. I'm sort of I don't want to mess with people here.
That's
I
probably a
They were
safe bet.
probably hiding a skunk ape back there or something.
Oh,
Something they
maybe
don't
that's what
want
they
you to
were
know
doing.
That
about.
sounds like a euphemism from when they're growing pot or something.
I mean, why not
Hey,
both?
who knows what's going on
The
out
skunk
there?
ape's growing the pot back there. Noah, if people want to follow the big year that you guys have going on, or just follow you and any of your birding stuff, is there any place they can do so?
Sure, I have an Instagram account. It's at Khanti.me, Khanti.me. I've been posting about my dad's big year and the work we're doing, and generally just the birds we find on there, and also just on eBird.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate it. It was cool hearing about all the Florida stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really fun talking about this state. There's lots of exciting stuff going on.
Oh yeah. Thanks everyone for watching and listening to this episode of the Badgerland Birding Podcast.